Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. Once, this house was an oasis for me. Every summer when we came here, I felt like a new bond formed between Lucas, my husband, and me, deeper and stronger than the previous year. Back then, it seemed like the old wooden walls breathed with us, and the floorboards creaked in sync with our steps. We walked through the fields, listened to the wind, and wove plans for the future, where there was no room for doubt or resentment. But now, sitting in the living room by the large window, I realize that something is gone. Something important, something fundamental, like warmth slowly but surely leaving this house. I look at the branches of the oak tree we always saw from the window. Once, I loved watching its limbs stretch toward the sky, as if they were searching for something they lacked. Now, this tree is just a symbol of times long gone. The wind gently rustles the leaves, but there's no longer any romance in that quiet movement. I feel cold. Are you all right? Lucas's voice cuts through my thoughts. He's standing in the doorway, slightly hunched, as if he doesn't quite know what to say. I notice how he's gripping an old mug, the same one I bought him for our anniversary, trying to bring something new into our everyday routine. Yes, everything's fine, I reply, barely lifting my gaze. A lie. I'm used to it. We both are. Lucas steps closer, sits across from me, his eyes lingering on my hands, which nervously play with the hem of the blanket. We remain silent. Once, our silence was cozy. It spoke more than words ever could. But now it's heavy. It feels like an invisible wall has risen between us, growing taller with each passing day. You haven't smiled much lately, he says quietly, and I flinch. His words stir something inside me. I've noticed it too, but I never thought he would. Or maybe he just doesn't care. It's just fatigue, I respond, avoiding his eyes. Fatigue. How I wish I could believe it was just that. I think back to our old conversations, when we could talk for hours about everything, the future, our dreams, even how one day, old and graying, we'd sit in this very house, reminiscing about the years we'd lived. But now, our dialogues have dwindled to brief comments about the weather, casual glances, and the occasional discussions of daily life. We're drifting apart, aren't we? Lucas says suddenly, and something hot and painful tightens in my chest. There it is, the truth we've been trying to ignore for so long. I stay silent, unable to find the right words. He's right. We both feel it, but until this moment, neither of us dared to admit it. We're drifting apart, like ships sailing in different directions across the ocean. I don't know how to fix this, I finally say, and in those words, I hear my own fear. Fear that our marriage can no longer be saved. Fear of a future that now seems too uncertain. Lucas lowers his head, and in that moment, I realize he feels the same way. He doesn't know either. We've lost something important, but we can't pinpoint when or where it happened. Maybe we're just tired of each other? His voice is calm, almost detached, as if he's talking not about us, but about two strangers who just happened to end up in the same house. Maybe, I whisper. But inside, everything screams. It's not just fatigue. My thoughts drift to how we've both changed over the years. I look at his face, the same features, the same eyes that once brought me so much joy. But now, in those eyes, I see the reflection of my own doubts and disappointments. We've walked together for so long, but somewhere along the way, our paths diverged. Do you still love me? I suddenly ask, shocked by my own boldness. Why did I choose this moment to ask? He's silent for a long time. I feel my heart pause, waiting for his answer. I think, yes, but I'm not sure it's the same love it used to be. His response hurts, though deep down I've suspected it for a while. Not the same love. What does that mean? Love can change, that's a fact, but what if it fades away, like footprints in the sand washed away by the tide? Silence again, and again, that wall, slowly but surely dividing us. I stand up and, without looking at him, walk to the kitchen. My hands tremble as I pour myself a glass of water. Inside, the feeling grows that something is slipping away, like sand through my fingers, something I will never be able to reclaim. As I stand by the window, my thoughts return to how it all began. Love, passion, shared dreams. And now, all that remains is the memory of those days that have slipped away and the emptiness that has filled this house, which has become a cold cage for me. And suddenly, a wave of doubt washes over me. Deep down, I realize there's something, or someone, else in our relationship that I can't quite identify. Perhaps it's my yearning for something new, something unknown? Or maybe it's just the longing for what we've lost. I close my eyes, feeling the cold air creeping into the room, wrapping around me like an old blanket. In that moment, I understand. Something inevitable is waiting for me ahead, something I fear but can no longer avoid. The yard in front of the house had long since turned into an abandoned space, overrun with weeds and branches that had fallen over months of neglect. I often looked at this garden from the kitchen window, but never had the courage to restore it. It felt like the chaos outside reflected the turmoil within me. Everything was tangled, overgrown, and finding the beginning of the thread seemed impossible. Charles, Lucas's father, offered to help. He had always been the kind of man who effortlessly connected with nature. For as long as I could remember, he loved working with the land. It calmed him. And while we never had a particularly close relationship, I always felt a certain kindness in his presence. Maybe it was because he viewed the world differently than others, deeper, with a greater understanding of what really mattered. "You probably think nothing can be done with this garden," he said as we stood at the edge of the overgrown flower bed. His voice was soft, yet confident. "Maybe," I replied, glancing at the yard. "It's been lost to us for a long time." "Nothing's lost until we stop caring," he smiled, bending down to touch the soil. "Sometimes all it takes is a little effort." His words stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just about the garden, but about my life as well. We started with simple tasks: clearing the branches, trimming the bushes, pulling out the weeds. Charles handed me a pair of pruning shears and extended them toward me. "Let's try to bring this land back to its former glory." I hesitated a little as I took the shears. It felt as though this work was significant, as if the garden wasn't just a garden, but a symbol of what Lucas and I had lost over the years. Time passed as we worked in silence, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt oppressive or isolating. On the contrary, I felt the air around us growing lighter, as if with every weed pulled and every bush trimmed, something was being cleared not only here, but within me as well. "Do you read?" Charles suddenly asked when we dragged a large pile of dry branches to the edge of the yard. "Sometimes," I said, thinking about it. I used to immerse myself in books. They were my escape. But in recent years, I'd opened them less and less. "I have a book I'd like to recommend," he continued, smiling at me. "It's about gardening, but really, it's about life. I think you'd like it." "What's it called?" "Secrets of the Earth. Don't judge it by the title. It's not just a book about growing plants, it's about growing yourself." I smirked. His words sounded wise, as if he was here not just to help with the garden, but with something more, with me. We continued working, discussing various things: books, movies, memories of times past. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. With Charles, I could speak freely, without worrying about how he would take my words. This ease of conversation was unexpected, but so necessary. With Lucas, it had long since faded. Our conversations had become shallow, as if we both forgot how to be more than just housemates. "Do you remember how, as a child, you loved digging in the dirt?" he asked at one point, when we stood side by side, arranging stones for a new flower bed. "Your eyes would light up every time you found worms." I couldn't help but smile. "Oh yes, I remember. Those were the best moments of my childhood." "Your mother and I always said you'd become a great gardener," he continued with a smile. "But life often doesn't go as planned." His words touched me. It was as if everything I was doing now, including my marriage, wasn't what I had expected. A thought crept into my mind. What if I had strayed from the right path too? What if I had missed something important? A garden is always a reflection of the one who creates it, Charles suddenly said as we finished for the day. He stood up slowly and brushed the dirt off his hands. You take care of it, it thrives. You neglect it, it dies. His words were simple, but they made me think. I looked again at the flower bed we had almost restored. The work was far from finished, but something about the process was bringing life back into me. Could it really be that simple? Do you like it here? He asked unexpectedly, and I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Yes, I admitted after a pause. But I feel like I've lost something important. Sometimes it seems like I'll never get it back. Charles looked at me intently, and I felt that he understood more than I could express with words. Anything can be restored, he said calmly. The only question is whether you're willing to put your heart into it. His words struck so deeply that I had to turn away to hide the tears welling up in my eyes. He was talking about the garden, but I knew it was about my life too. You're right, he said after a pause. Sometimes you just need to give yourself time. It doesn't mean everything is lost. We stood side by side, and I suddenly realized that I felt at ease with him. Here, in this garden, amidst the tangled branches and weeds, I felt understood, heard. It was something I had long been missing with Lucas. Shall we continue tomorrow? He suggested, and I nodded, offering a weak smile. Yes, let's. The garden had suddenly stopped being just a place. It had become something more, something that was bringing Charles and me closer together. We walked along the lake in silence. The water was calm, only gentle waves lapping at the shore, as if mirroring our inner turmoil. This lake had always seemed like a quiet refuge to me, a place to hide from the world. Here, there was no city noise, no people, no routine, just the two of us, and this enveloping peace. A beautiful place. Charles finally breaks the silence, and I feel his words drift with the wind. They seem almost insignificant, but there's something deeper hidden within them. Yes, I reply, glancing toward the far shore. This place has always been special for Lucas. We used to come here often when we first started dating. Saying his name, I feel a slight pang of pain. The thought of Lucas seems out of place in this moment, as if his presence is interfering with something real trying to unfold. Charles walks slowly beside me, his hands in his pockets. We both stop by the water, and the wind gently tosses my hair, brushing it off my face. I notice that he, too, is looking at the lake, but his gaze seems to penetrate through the surface, as if he's searching for something deeper, beyond what the eye can see. Here by the lake, I always feel free, he suddenly says, and I can't help but notice the strange, barely perceptible note in his voice. As if the whole world is left behind, as if you can start over again. Start over. I quietly repeat, feeling the weight of those words resonate within me. How long I've dreamed of such an opportunity. To start anew, to free myself from the burden of expectations and obligations. Charles gives me a fleeting glance, but I catch it, and our eyes meet. Something inside me freezes. In that brief moment, something invisible yet palpable passes between us. The tension in the air becomes almost tangible, like a gust of wind you can't see but can feel on your skin. We should probably head back, he suggests, but doesn't move. Yes, I respond mechanically, but my legs don't budge. I don't want to leave either. We both stand still, as if something invisible is holding us here, on this shore, where the world seems to have stopped. And in that moment, Charles moves a little closer to me. His hand barely brushes against mine, and from that simple touch, a wave of warmth spreads through my body. I don't pull my hand away, though I could, but something inside whispers that everything is happening as it should. I feel his gaze, warm and heavy, yet calm, like this lake. The water reflects the sky, and our tension seems to become part of its smooth surface. My heart starts to race as I realize that this moment can no longer be stopped. His hand gently slides over mine, and I suddenly feel him turn toward me, pulling me closer. Everything around us seems blurred, as if the world disappears, leaving only this quiet lake and the two of us. I lift my eyes, and our gazes meet again, but now there's nothing accidental about it. In his eyes, I see something I hadn't noticed before: desire, deep but hidden for many years. Charles slowly leans toward me, and I feel his breath on my skin, each moment stretching into eternity. I could pull away. I could say something to stop this kiss, but I don't. I don't want to. When his lips touch mine, the whole world suddenly shrinks to this one sensation: warmth, softness, and that forbidden passion I can't put into words. My mind is foggy, like the surface of the water, which no longer reflects the sky, but simply absorbs everything around it. This kiss. It was unexpected, but as inevitable as the evening tide. I feel my fingers touch his face, and in that moment, everything I knew collapses. I can't say how long it lasted: seconds, minutes, hours. But when he pulls away, I feel that something inside me has changed. This kiss became a turning point, a line beyond which there is no return. "I'm sorry," he whispers, stepping back, but there's no regret in his voice. He looks at me as if trying to understand what I feel, what I'm thinking at this moment. "Don't," I reply, but my voice sounds quiet, almost uncertain. Inside, a storm rages. I look at the water, trying to find an answer in its surface. The lake is as calm as before, but inside me, a storm is brewing. Charles looks at me for a few more seconds, then turns toward the lake. I sense that he too understands. Everything has changed. Our walk along the lake has become the beginning of something we can't control. "We really should head back," he says, his voice soft but somehow different from before. There's no longer that confidence in it. I nod in agreement, but despite our words, we're in no hurry to leave. This moment, this kiss by the lake, it has left its mark. We walk back in silence, as if both trying to comprehend what just happened. The lake stays behind, but its calm surface will continue to reflect the storm that has risen within me for a long time to come. The city apartment felt too cold after the silence of the countryside house. I sat by the window, watching the endless stream of cars, which seemed as relentless as my thoughts. Everything that happened by the lake wouldn't leave me alone. In every quiet moment, in every glance from Lucas, I found myself returning to that kiss, to the feeling that had broken through the barrier I had so carefully built inside myself. "Adeline, are you listening to me?" Lucas's voice pulled me out of the string of thoughts. He was standing in the kitchen, leaning on the counter, looking at me with a kind of persistence, as if waiting for something important. "Sorry, I got lost in thought," I replied, trying to smile. But it didn't come out right. Everything inside me was too tangled to fake ease. He came closer, placed a cup of tea on the table, and sat down across from me. I could feel his presence, feel his gaze on me, but I couldn't force myself to meet his eyes. "You've been distant lately," he said softly. "I don't understand what's going on. We barely talk." His words, spoken gently yet with pain, pierced me like needles. Yes, I knew he would notice. Our distance could no longer remain unnoticed. But what could I tell him? Admit that my thoughts were preoccupied with another man? That I no longer felt the connection with him that we once had? "I'm just tired," I said, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. It was a lie I'd been telling myself and him, hoping it would cover up the real reasons. But I couldn't lie to myself, not this time. Lucas reached out to touch my hand, his fingers grazing mine, as if trying to bring me back to him through this simple gesture, to recover those moments that now felt lost. "Can we talk?" he asked, and I realized that this conversation had been brewing for a long time. Everything inside me tightened. I was afraid of this talk, afraid it would force me to confront the truth I had been ignoring for so long. but I had to say something, to break away from the oppressive silence that was growing between us. I don't know what to say, I muttered, searching for words, but they all felt empty and meaningless. Maybe start with what's happening? His voice was full of concern, and I could sense that he genuinely wanted to understand. But I didn't even know how to explain what was tearing me apart inside. Lucas continued looking at me, and there was something desperate in his gaze. He wanted to reclaim the closeness we once shared, but the harder he tried, the more I felt the enormous chasm between us. I looked at his face, the face that had once been so familiar, so close, but now felt foreign. I can't, I blurted out, lowering my head as I felt tears beginning to well up in my eyes. But I didn't let them fall, not now. What can't you do, Adeline? He asked, looking confused. And his confusion was yet another pain for me. I knew I was hurting him, but I couldn't stop. I can't be the same as before, I said quietly, finally daring to look him in the eyes. I feel like we've lost something important, and I don't know how to get it back. My words sounded as if I was finally admitting what I'd been afraid of for so long. I couldn't pretend any longer that everything could be fixed. We were no longer the people we once were. Lucas was silent. I saw emotions flash in his eyes: surprise, pain, disappointment. He didn't know what to say. And honestly, I wasn't expecting an answer. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He finally asked, and there was a hint of bitterness in his voice. I didn't know how. I tried. I thought it would just pass, I admitted, but I didn't believe my own words. Inside, everything screamed that I had known the truth for a long time. Nothing would pass. Lucas got up from the table and paced around the room, as if he needed to do something to process what he had just heard. He stopped by the window, crossing his arms, and was silent for a long time. I feel like you're drifting away from me, he finally said, staring out the window instead of at me. And I don't understand what's happening to us. We used to be so close, and now… I'm trying, Adeline, but it feels like everything is slipping away from us. He turned to look at me. In his eyes, I saw the pain I couldn't ease. I'm always here, Adeline. I'm not giving up, he said softly, but there was no longer the same confidence in his voice. I nodded, unable to find words to respond. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a matter of time. Something had already changed, and I didn't know how to bring it back. That night, I lay awake for a long time, watching the shadows play on the ceiling. Next to me, on the other side of the bed, Lucas breathed quietly, but his presence no longer brought me comfort. Every movement, every breath reminded me of the chasm that now separated us. I felt the growing guilt inside me for what had happened by the lake, for how my feelings for Charles had turned into something more. My thoughts kept returning to that kiss. I replayed it in my mind, each time feeling a mixture of guilt and passion. I knew it had changed everything, and now I couldn't pretend that moment would just disappear. The abandoned estate stood on the edge of the old family land, hidden behind thick trees and time, like a mysterious corner of the past that everyone had forgotten. Once, this land belonged to Charles's ancestors, but now only ruins remained of its former glory. He suggested we take a walk there, saying that the place was full of stories no one remembered anymore. We walked along the overgrown path, and I felt a growing, strange excitement within me. The long branches of the trees intertwined above our heads, like the arches of an ancient temple, creating a special atmosphere of seclusion. I could still hear the rustling leaves beneath our steps, but I felt as if I were cut off from the world. There was no reality here, just us and the forgotten corners of memory that would soon reveal themselves before us. Charles walked slightly ahead, confidently leading me through the thickets, like a man who knew every crack in these ruins. I could feel his closeness, and my heart began to beat faster because of it. We didn't speak. The silence between us had become familiar, but it no longer weighed on me as it had before. On the contrary, it filled the air with a thick, unspoken tension. When we finally emerged into the clearing, the sight of the old estate unfolded before me. It was half destroyed, with the roof collapsed in places and the walls covered in green moss, yet it still held something special. In those stones, in every crack, it felt as if history was breathing. It's all so forgotten, I whispered, glancing around, as if afraid to disturb the peace of this place. Yes, no one's been here in a long time, Charles quietly replied, stopping by one of the walls and touching the old stones. But there's something special about it, don't you think? These ruins remind us that everything passes, but nothing truly disappears. Everything that once mattered leaves its mark, even if no one sees it anymore. I couldn't help but notice how his words reflected what was happening between us. Our feelings, like these forgotten corners of the past, were something that perhaps shouldn't exist, yet still left a trace. I felt the desire to be with him growing inside me, but that desire was tangled with guilt that wouldn't let me go. We approached an old stone bench, and I sat down, feeling my heart begin to race. Charles sat beside me, and our hands were so close again that I could feel his warmth. We didn't speak, but each moment of silence was filled with something invisible yet palpable. Have you ever thought that these ruins are like our lives? Charles suddenly asked, turning to me. His eyes gleamed in the sunlight, filtering through the dense leaves. We all carry the imprints of the past with us, even if they're hidden. His words once again penetrated deep inside me. I thought about how everything that had happened between us seemed like a reflection of something lost, but still alive. Like these old walls, our feelings were hidden from everyone, yet they existed, leaving a mark in every step we took, in every glance we exchanged. My body tensed as I realized I could no longer hold back. This place, this moment, this man, everything seemed to be calling me to him, and I could no longer ignore that call. I can't anymore, I whispered, not fully realizing what I was about to do. Charles looked at me closely, as if trying to understand what I meant. But before he could say anything, I took a step forward, a step that had felt inevitable from the moment we first met on this land. I moved closer to him, and this time I didn't wait for him to make the first move. My lips met his, and everything inside me finally burst out. This kiss wasn't like the one by the lake. This time I knew what I wanted. It was a conscious step. The passion I had been trying to suppress for so long flared up like a fire finally allowed to burn. His arms gently embraced me, and I felt all my uncertainty vanish inside me. We were in this abandoned corner, in this place full of the secrets of the past, and our kiss became a part of that history. Every touch, every breath felt as if everything that had been before, my whole life, my doubts, my fears, had disappeared, leaving only this moment. But with every second, I realized that this kiss wasn't just a physical expression of desires. It was something more. It became a symbol of everything I had hidden inside myself, of what I so desperately lacked in my relationship with Lucas. With Charles, I felt a freedom I had long lost. When our lips finally parted, I stood before him, realizing that we had gone too far. I saw it in his eyes. He understood it too. This kiss had changed everything. There was no going back to the way things were. We shouldn't have, I said quietly, but my words sounded weak. Deep down, I knew I had wanted this. I know, he replied, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. But something inside both of us, it won't let us stop. I felt the guilt rising inside me again. This kiss had been sweet, but it became yet another crack tearing my life apart. I knew this connection shouldn't exist, but it already did. It was too late. We stood among the ruins of the past, as if we had become part of this forgotten place ourselves. The old estate watched us silently, like a mute witness to our forbidden closeness. The letter lay on the table, folded neatly as if someone had recently taken it out and hurriedly tucked it away again. I stood by the window in our city apartment, feeling the silence in the room like a harbinger of something terrible. I didn't know exactly what, but a growing sense of unease was stirring inside me, as if something important was about to come to the surface. When I heard Lucas enter the room, my heart began to race. I had grown used to his silence lately, but this silence was different. It felt not just distant, it had become wary, cold, and deliberate. He no longer asked about my mood, no longer tried to mend our relationship. He was observing, with his gaze, his behavior, his gestures, as if he were waiting for something. "Did you find time to sort through your things?" Lucas asked unexpectedly, and I heard something unfamiliar, guarded in his voice. He walked over to the table where I kept various papers, letters, old photographs, random notes I had left over the years. "Yes, a little," I replied, without turning to him. I didn't know what he was referring to, but the tone of his voice was already making me uneasy. "Do you know what I found?" His voice grew quieter, almost a whisper, and I felt a chill run down my spine. At that moment, I knew something had happened. Something significant. I turned to him and saw that he was holding an old envelope, the very one written by Charles. The letter I had long since forgotten, but that had been stored among my things, as if waiting for its moment. My heart clenched, and a wave of panic rose within me. "What's this?" he asked, narrowing his eyes and looking at me intently. There was something icy in his gaze that made me freeze in place. "It's a letter from Charles," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside, everything was screaming. "A letter from my father, to you," Lucas repeated slowly, as if trying to process the phrase, as though it had already been haunting him. He unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "Dear Adeline, I can't stay silent anymore. The weight of what we're carrying, all that we're hiding, it presses on me every day. I understand that our meetings should never have happened, but they've become a part of me, and I can't deny my feelings. I'm afraid that the truth will come out one day, but at the same time, I can't hide it any longer. Please, be careful. Lucas must not find out." I felt the ground give way beneath me as his voice trailed off. The letter I had received from Charles weeks ago had now become not just a testament to our feelings, but something that was destroying our lives. I knew this letter would one day be the cause of a catastrophe, but I hadn't expected Lucas to find it like this, by chance, among my things. "What does all this mean, Adeline?" he asked, lowering the letter and slowly moving toward me. His voice carried not just pain, there was a sense of betrayal in it, cutting through him. It's not what you think," I began, but the words caught in my throat. I knew no explanation could help. The letter spoke for itself, and I was powerless against what had already happened. "You were meeting with my father behind my back?" His voice was quiet, but there was an underlying fury building in it. He was ready for a confrontation, and I could feel it. It wasn't the way you think." I tried again to explain, but even I didn't believe my own words. Lucas came closer, holding the letter in his hand as if it were proof of my betrayal. His eyes, filled with pain and disappointment, pierced through me. "What else have you been hiding from me?" he asked, and now his voice carried not just anger, but cold determination. He wanted the whole truth, and I knew there was no way out. My heart was beating so loudly that I barely heard his next words. "I've seen how you look at him. I noticed how you've been distancing yourself from me. But I thought it was just exhaustion, tension. But now I understand. All this time, you were with him, weren't you?" I didn't know what to say. Inside me, a storm was raging. I felt guilt, fear, shame. But I couldn't deny the truth, that I truly did have feelings for Charles. Those feelings had been growing inside me since the moment we started working on the garden together, as he became my refuge from reality. I didn't want this to happen," I whispered, finally finding the strength to confess. But the confession brought no relief. Instead, it only deepened my guilt. Lucas stared at me for a long time, as if trying to understand who I really was, as if everything he thought he knew about me had suddenly turned out to be a lie. "I should have seen this earlier," he said, and now his voice was filled with bitterness. "But now it's clear. I won't let you and him destroy my life." He turned and left the room, leaving me alone. My breathing became shallow, and I felt my knees weaken. The letter still lay on the table, like poison seeping through our lives, contaminating everything around us. I knew that this moment was the beginning of the end. Our relationship, like the old walls of the estate, had begun to crumble under the weight of lies and hidden feelings. Lucas was no longer the man trying to understand what was happening to us. Now he knew, and I knew that this knowledge would lead us to inevitable disaster. The empty house weighed on me. Every corner, every room now seemed filled with ghosts from the past. What was once our cozy refuge, a place where I felt safe and loved, had now turned cold and unfamiliar. There was no more laughter, no warm conversations in the evenings, no smell of freshly brewed coffee in the mornings. Only silence, ringing in my ears, shattering the last remnants of my illusions. When Lucas filed for divorce, I didn't feel shocked. I knew it was inevitable. His silence after the day he found the letter was deafening. We barely spoke, only crossing paths in the hallways like two strangers. There was no longer pain or anger in his eyes, just a cold determination to put an end to it. He had made his decision, and all that was left for me was to accept it. The documents arrived unexpectedly, as is often the case with things you expect but are still not ready to face. I stared at them for a long time, not daring to open the envelope. Inside, I had the growing sense that this moment would mark the final line, a line that would divide my life into before and after. I signed the papers that same day, though my heart clenched with pain as I wrote my name on each page. This was the end. Not just the end of a marriage, but the end of the hopes I had once tied to Lucas. Our dreams, our shared years, everything crumbled like sand slipping through my fingers. After he took his things and left, the house fell into an eerie emptiness. I was left alone, and that loneliness wasn't just physical, it penetrated me to the core. I felt that something in my soul had broken forever. My reflection in the mirror felt alien to me. Who was this woman who had destroyed everything she once held dear? At first, I thought that maybe with Charles, it would be different, that perhaps these feelings were something real, something that could become a new chapter in my life. But soon I realized it was an illusion created out of my own needs, fears, and desires to escape reality. Charles disappeared from my life just as abruptly as he had entered it. After Lucas told him about the divorce, a heavy silence hung between us. He no longer sought meetings, stopped writing, and I understood that this was an inevitable part of the destruction. We both knew it couldn't continue, but neither of us dared to admit it. Every morning I woke up with a heavy feeling of guilt that pressed on me harder with each passing day. I recalled moments with Charles, his touches, his kisses, those seconds when it seemed like I was truly alive again. But now all that brought was pain. I had not only destroyed my marriage, but also my own soul. The house where Lucas and I had spent so many happy years was now a grim reminder that I once had a family, one that I had lost. In every room, I saw traces of him, our shared laughter, our conversations, plans for a future that no longer existed. The walls that once offered warmth were now witnesses to my mistakes and disappointments. One day, I walked through the house, trying to find something that would bring back a sense of the old comfort. I opened closets, pulled out old photos, books we had read together, but it all felt empty. The memories no longer offered solace. They only intensified the feeling that everything I once loved was gone forever. I often returned in my thoughts to that moment by the lake, to the first kiss with Charles, to that moment when everything I thought was right and true collapsed. I thought that was the turning point that would lead me to something new, to new happiness. But now, with everything over, I saw that kiss differently. It wasn't a step toward something better, but the beginning of the end. My feelings for Charles no longer brought joy. They didn't give me the freedom I had so desperately craved. Now, every time I remembered him, all I felt was remorse. I knew I had destroyed not only my own life, but also the lives of Lucas, Charles, and perhaps even their families. That kiss became a symbol, not of passion, but of destruction. I sat in the old armchair in the living room, watching the dusty rays of sunlight streaming through the windows, and realized that all that lay ahead of me was emptiness. There were no more illusions. I couldn't escape from myself. Everything I had tried to find in Charles, comfort, understanding, passion, was temporary and false. Now, all I had left was the silence of an empty house, and the silence of my shattered heart. Silence had become an inseparable part of my life. Every corner of this house, once filled with laughter, voices, and life, had now become just a space. The emptiness enveloped me with each new night spent alone. I no longer tried to escape it. This silence, like an old, loyal companion, was always there, reminding me that it was all over. The house that was once my refuge, my place of strength, had now turned into a prison. Every day, waking up, I saw no reason to move. Even simple actions seemed devoid of purpose. There was nowhere to go, no one to call, and no plans for the future. My whole life up until this moment had revolved around my family, around Lucas. And now, all of that was gone. I walked through the empty rooms, as if through a museum of my own mistakes, where every object reminded me of what I had destroyed. Our photos, still hanging on the walls, felt like a mockery, silent witnesses of what our life had once been. I should have taken them down long ago, put them away, burned them, but I couldn't. They were all I had left of the years when we were happy. Lucas didn't call anymore. I didn't expect him to. We had signed the papers, exchanged our last glances, and he was gone. Forever. In his eyes that day, there was something I couldn't forget. Not hatred, not anger, but disappointment. He no longer saw me as he once had. I was someone else to him now, a stranger. I often wondered how I had reached this point. When did the destruction begin? Was it when I met Charles? Or had things started to fall apart long before that? My thoughts constantly returned to that summer when we were restoring the garden together. I thought it was our joint project, our chance to start anew. But now the garden had become a symbol of what we couldn't save. Instead of rebuilding my connection with my husband, I turned to his father. And that choice changed everything. But Charles left too. After the truth came out, there was nothing left between us. Something inside both of us broke as soon as my family fell apart. Maybe it was guilt, maybe shame. But our closeness no longer brought joy, only pain. I stood by the window, looking at the old oak tree visible beyond the house. Its branches, once seeming so strong to me, now looked weathered. The winds of time, like a cruel metaphor, had snapped them. Lucas and I had once dreamed of a future that would always be bright and secure, like that oak. But everything had changed. The branches couldn't withstand it. I couldn't go back. There was no room in this house for the old me, the one who believed in love, in family values, in the idea that relationships could be mended. This house had become a symbol of what I had lost. Not just my family, but myself. With each new day, I realized more clearly that the point of no return had already passed. I couldn't go back to the past, to those moments when things could still be fixed. That thought was crushing, but at the same time, it gave me a strange sense of freedom. There was no longer any need to try to fix something that was already dead. No more fighting for something that had long lost its meaning. Many times, I thought about leaving this place, abandoning the house as it was, and starting a new life somewhere far away. But every time I took a step towards the door, something stopped me. It was as if part of me was still tied to this place, to the ruins of my life. Leaving would mean admitting the final end, and I wasn't ready to make that admission. My phone stayed silent. There were no more calls, no messages, no friends trying to offer support. Maybe I had pushed them all away when I tried to deal with this crisis on my own. Or maybe they knew that I was already lost. With each day, I became more aware. I hadn't just lost my family, I had lost myself. Somewhere along the way, amid the guilt, the doubts, the forbidden kisses, I had stopped being the woman I once was. Now, all that remained was to try to find the answers to who I had become.